better that way.
That's right. Hey, welcome back to yet another great episode of This Week in Christian History. And this week we are focusing on a major impact on the growth of Christianity throughout the America, and in particular when we are talking about Francis Asbury and modern Methodism, no matter what form it might be today, can certainly trace a whole lot of its expansion and its roots in America to this pioneering person. And we are glad to have as our guest today Dr. John Wigger, who is in the Department of History at the University of Missouri. So he's all Mizzou'd up for us today to be able to share some time with us and learn a little bit more about Francis Asbury. So, Dr. Wigger, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
Absolutely. So, just tell us a little bit about Asbury. I mean, some people may know that, there's an Asbury Seminary, and they might know that they might see that name at a local Methodist church somewhere. I don't even have any idea how many Methodist church might be known as the Asbury Methodist Church, but my hunch is there's way more than a dozen, okay, around to do. So, what an impactful guy. So, tell us a little bit about him and where he came from and how he got here.
Yeah, so Francis Asbury, he was the first bishop and really the person who preserved and organized and inspired, if you will,
Mhm.
American Methodism in its early phase of explosive growth. And in that sense, and of course, Methodism becomes the largest Protestant church in America by the Civil War.
Mhm.
So, in that sense, Asbury shaped American religion as much as anyone ever has. He was an unlikely leader, and I think that's one
Hmm.
of the reasons that maybe he's not as well known as other figures from colonial and 19th century America. He doesn't really fit the image we have of an inspiring leader.
Hmm.
Yeah, without Francis Asbury, much of American religion would look different than it does today.
Absolutely. So we're talking about a guy that put, I mean, are there estimates of how many miles he may have put on horseback walking and other places to go out and be a circuit rider to spread the development of the church? Are they just good estimates, or we think we kind of got a good idea?
I think it from his journals, which are pretty complete, you can get a good idea. Asbury lived in America for 45 years.
Oh, wow.
You know, he never owned a home. He never got married, of course. He rarely stayed in any one place for more than a few weeks, but actually more than a few days when he was doing his annual tours. So he rode on horseback the length and breadth of the United States as it expanded for 45 years and lived as a house guest in other people's homes for almost the entirety of that time. I think the best estimates are he rode about 140,000 miles on horseback.
Gee whiz. That hurts my back just thinking about it.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, think about the physical shape you have to be in. I mean, just to endure something like that. It doesn't mean you got to be a long distance runner or an equestrian master, but you just think about all of those miles, right? That's a lot.
He was a tough guy, and throughout his career, most of his preachers were young
Mm.
because itinerants would tend to get married and locate. They would stay in the church, they would become local preachers. But especially as Asbury aged, people looked at him and just were astonished that he could continue to do what he did.
How about that? So, how did he get connected to Methodism? How was that something that he uh, uh, connected to and decided that that was, the denomination or the right way or the best way or whatever it might be to actually come to America? Because he's from Great Britain, right?
He is, yes. He grew up in a little village outside of Birmingham, England. His father was a gardener for a local brewery.
Hmm.
And he evidently had some embarrassing uh, habit. He was probably an alcoholic. And it was really Asbury's mother that brought him into Methodism when she discovered Methodism as well, in the early 1740s, late 1730s. Asbury became more active in Wesley's Methodist connection and eventually became a circuit riding preacher in Great Britain. Um,
Mm,
he was never really very distinguished. Wesley tended to give him hard, out of the way circuits. Asbury did well on those circuits, but they were never the kind of prominent places that would make him a star, so to speak, of early Methodism. And I think one of the reasons that Wesley was willing to send Asbury to America was he knew Asbury was dependable,
mm.
but he also knew he was expendable. He wasn't someone he needed to keep in England.
Wow. So give us an idea of whether it was in England or whether it was in America. What is he actually doing as a circuit rider? I mean, you're going from spot to spot to do what exactly?
Yeah, let me describe the American context because
Okay.
actually the circuit system was better suited for the US than it was for Great Britain.
Mm,
Um, so the Methodist itinerancy, the idea was that preachers would not locate in one place. They wouldn't just simply live in a town and have a church there. The way to reach the most people was to have them ride a circuit and essentially preach in a different place every day. So, pretty quickly in America, the standard circuit became a 4 week circuit. So, it would take 4 weeks to ride around, and you would have a preaching appointment virtually every day, maybe 28 appointments on a 4 week circuit.
wow.
So, you would be preaching to a different congregation and not just preaching, but meeting with people in small groups and discussing things with the leaders, whether it was a local preacher or lay leaders in each little village or town. And it was extraordinarily effective for the U.S. at that point because the country was really thinly settled, and
Mm.
most communities could not attract or afford a preacher of their own. So this way, they had contact with a preacher and the sacraments and kind of the structure of the church at least once a month.
Wow. So the bulk of it was preaching. But then there also would be kind of what we might call church development or church planting or those type of things as well, or was it no, he was coming there to preach and to be able to, I mean, or to administer the sacraments or whichever, some of all of that, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just preaching. The itinerants were expected to kind of be the guides for local societies. They called them societies instead of churches because that was Wesley's practice in England. And of course, the system, since the circuit riders were only around once or twice a month, the system did rely on lay leaders. But the itinerant preachers were there to sort of guide them and help them stay connected to the church. They preached, but they had to do a lot more than that. Um, if they were in a town for a day, it was a full day. It wasn't just preaching and getting on your horse and leaving.
I mean, but I would assume at every town when he got there, um, that he might be doing a different thing each day, each time he's there. Like maybe this time we've got a problem we need to deal with, or maybe there's this other issue we got to fill, or hey, I need to meet with the lay leadership to make sure they're getting that barn hoisted up so we can, or whatever it is that they're trying to get done, right? It's probably a little something every day different.
It was. It required a lot of resourcefulness, and it was demanding not just the time on horseback, but everything that had to be done. So, on the local level, Methodists were organized around class meetings. These are essentially small groups. And what defined you as a Methodist, what defined your membership, so to speak, was your attendance at a weekly class meeting. So it was mandatory. If you wanted to be a member, you had to attend your class meeting. And at the class meetings, there would be a class leader who would uh, examine each person in the group. Kind of a
Mm,
format that we wouldn't be comfortable with today, but they
hmm.
would literally go around the room one at a time and ask people how they had done that week, what their failings had been, anything they were grateful for or wanted prayer for, one at a time. And then, of course, when the circuit preacher would come through town, one of the first things he would do, and the circuit preachers were always men in the late 18th and early 19th century,
Hmm.
was meet with the class leaders and
Mm.
say, how are your classes doing? How are your members faring? So it was something that brought you into close contact with local people, even if it was just once or twice a month. And you had to do that everywhere. You had to do it 28 times a month and then start
Right.
over and do it again. It was exhausting. And Francis Asbury's entire career was a version of that. He wasn't just an itinerant preacher, but what he did was a large scale version of that same thing.
How about that? Well, that's a hey, we're enjoying our conversation we're having here with Dr. John Wigger, and we're talking all about Francis Asbury, Bishop Asbury, correct? So we'll want to
Hmm.
get to that piece. So patience, obviously, in addition to the ability to preach or at least to be able to deliver a message, it seems like a part of the formula here, right? I mean, each town you get to, I guess the number or village or whatever the number of classes would just depending on the kind of relative to the size of that community. I mean, might there just be one or two classes, or might there be 20? I mean, just depending on where you were.
Yeah, if you had a 4 week circuit with all of the stops I've described, you'd probably just have a handful of classes.
Okay.
Um, some of the urban churches, as we would think of them today, might have 20 class meetings. But in those settings, itinerants generally didn't have as many appointments, so they could spend a
Uh,
few days at each
okay.
church because obviously that just the number of people required more than just a 1 day visit. Yeah.
Right. Right. But that was their focus was the were the folks in the rural areas, the people outside those urban areas that needed that support, that needed that.
Yeah, well, in 1800, more than 95% of Americans lived in a town of less than 2,500 people, and most of them in places much smaller than that. So most people lived in communities of just a few hundred people.
Well, how did they determine what the circuits were? Or, I mean, is that, I mean, where the circuits were? I mean, is that part of what his job as being bishop and Thomas Coke was he? I'm asking a bunch of questions at once, right? But I mean, but right, but were they kind of ordained or given the office of bishop at the same time frame, or do I have that backwards?
No, you're right. So after the American Revolution, which John Wesley was not a fan of, he
Mm,
was a loyalist, supported Britain, which
interesting.
did not make him popular in America. He realized that American Methodism needed its own system, so to speak. It would need to be, in some measure, separate from British Methodism,
Uh,
although Wesley still considered it his connection. And one of the things he knew he would have to do was begin to ordain preachers
mm,
in America, something he didn't do in England up to that point because he still considered himself a member of the Church of England. He wasn't a bishop, and only bishops could ordain
I got you.
ministers. So he took the step of ordaining Thomas Coke, who was one of his key assistants in England, and sending him to the U.S. to ordain Francis Asbury in 1784. And this actually took Asbury by surprise. He didn't know Wesley was going to do exactly this.
Hmm,
And I think his response is telling because one of Asbury's gifts as a leader was a great deal of cultural sensitivity. So he'd come to understand America and Americans. He understood the kind of democratic fervor that was behind the American Revolution.
mm,
And when Coke told him what his plan was, he thought, well, if I just accept ordination from John Wesley through Thomas Coke, American Methodists might not really like that.
Huh.
So his response was to send out feelers through the church and just ask the preachers, "Do you like this idea?" And overwhelmingly, they said, "Yes, we want you to be ordained." As Wesley wanted him to be called a superintendent, but they said, "We definitely want you to be ordained, and we're going to call you a bishop."
So he's getting the full American feel of bottom up, right? I mean,
Yeah,
instead of Church of England top down, right? I mean, just uh,
exactly.
he was able to interpret that, right, and be able to to say essentially, "Hey, look, let me tell you about my folks." Okay, I've already bad enough that I was a King George III fan. Okay. I don't need to have anything else. Maybe you didn't say it that way, but I mean, but I know these people and I know, and I'm with them and I know how they're thinking and how they're feeling. And this is just not going to fly, right? If we don't get some kind of buy-in from the people that we are ministering to.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Wow. How smart of him, right? For him to
Mm.
do all that. So did he then figure out? I mean, and this may be way more than is uh, laid out or even to be worried with, but how did they know literally to go from was Baltimore? Is that the spot where he was ordained or where the bishopric is that where the meeting happened that or did I miss that up?
No, it was
Oh,
Baltimore. Kind of became the unofficial capital of early Methodism,
hmm.
the
And so
center.
did they draw out literally here's how long it should take you to be in New York and Massachusetts and Vermont, and here's how long it should be able to take you if you're around Philadelphia. Or, I mean, did they literally draw those things out, or did he just kind of chose a spot?
Well, Asbury never located to a particular spot because he wanted to model for his itinerant preachers what he expected of them.
Ah,
So
okay,
he itinerated, only his circuit was the entire nation. Um, and the circuits just grew organically.
okay,
Wherever someone would say, "Hey, we formed a society here, and we want to form class meetings and be a part of the broader church," then Asbury would include them on a circuit. Or when an itinerant preacher said, "There's a new town here that's grown up on on the frontier or somewhere else, and we really need to have a presence there." Asbury would include that as a stop on an itinerant preacher's route.
gotcha. So it was just, I mean, he had a lot of time to think, right? And
Mm,
so
he
in
did.
between spots, right? And so, hey, he's starting to probably kind of weigh it and judge and make a discernment. I need to be looking for some more preachers, or I need to be thinking about who else could go do this work and having that all kind of running through his head at the same time. It's a lot.
Yeah, I think the way that he did it is really telling. So let me introduce it what I mean this way.
Sure.
Asbury was actually a terrible preacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah, even his most generous followers just didn't think he was very good as a preacher, and he wasn't good in front of large audiences. Even when he had to speak at conferences, annual conferences of his preachers, they were his preachers. He still faltered for words often. So his gift was not inspiring people through his brilliance as a public speaker,
Mm,
which again I think makes him an unexpected leader. What he was good at is in small groups, he could be absolutely magnetic. He was people just opened up in front of him in small groups. So as he rode around the nation, he would stay in different followers' homes.
hmm.
Um, he varied his route every year so that he would visit new places.
Ah,
And he would come to town and stay with some family and talk to them and say, "How is the church here? Tell me how you're doing." And then as he rode, his circuit preachers, when he rode into their territory, onto their circuits, they would meet up with him and ride for a day. And of course, it was their one big chance to talk to the bishop. So they would
sure.
talk his ear off, and he was happy to listen. Um, and he did this every day. And then he would appoint the preachers at their annual conference meetings. So there were multiple annual conferences, and they just grew in number over the years. And when he came to town for an annual conference, I discovered that late in his career, there's a notebook at Drew University archives that didn't have anybody's name on it, and it's in multiple hands, so to speak, different people
Mm,
writing in it. But
mhm,
it's pretty clear it was Asbury's notebook, and he would come to an annual conference and he would hand the notebook to a presiding elder, so to speak, a supervising preacher over
mhm.
the itinerant preachers, and he would say, "Write me a one-line summary, an evaluation of all of your preachers."
Wow.
So they would take the notebook and write an evaluation of all of the preachers in the conference. And then he would read that over and say, okay, where should I appoint these guys? Which circuits are they best suited for? So it was very much a collaborative
Mm,
form of leadership that was built on deep connection. And everybody knew that he wanted to stay with local people, that he wanted to be close to his people. I think the best way to describe this is to say that the closer people got to Francis Asbury, the more they liked and respected him. If they heard him preach in a big meeting, they probably didn't think that much of him. It's like, who is this old man? In fact, that happened to him once.
Really?
Oh yeah, he was traveling with Jesse Lee and he wasn't feeling well. So they got to the church just before the meeting started, and he said to Lee, "Why don't you preach and I'll just give an exhortation afterwards." So Lee preached, and Asbury stood up and gave an exhortation. And uh, um, famously, someone in the congregation who didn't know that that had happened, someone asked them, "Well, what did you think of the bishop?" And he said, "Well, I liked his sermon, but I didn't really care for that old man who spoke after him." Uh,
Well,
hmm,
that sounds like he could be another whole study in just organizational grassroots development, right? I mean, in
I
management.
think
I
so.
mean, just about. Do you think his where his we have a podcast episode coming out pretty soon on Dwight L. Moody, for example, and
Hmm.
his background and where he grew up had an enormous impact on where he wanted to focus with, children and those of need because he came from that. Do you think being in a household that had this potentially alcoholic father and what that was like for him to be able to connect with people one on one and kind of, hey, I've walked in those shoes. I kind of know what that's like. I understand what this is about, that made him maybe more relatable, that made people want to be able to, made him more real instead of being the bishop, right? I mean, he was a real guy that had a, real background like any other number of people would be.
Yeah, I think so. In Asbury's case, I think it worked out that way. I mean,
Mm,
he grew up in what we would think of as a working class family, and
hmm.
he was a metal worker's apprentice before he became a preacher.
Oh, okay.
So this is unlike John Wesley or Thomas Coke, who had Oxford degrees, right?
Right.
He wasn't a college educated gentleman. He was someone who worked with his hands before he turned to preaching. So staying in a two-room cottage on the frontier was no big deal for Francis Asbury.
Right.
In
And
fact, he
I'm
was,
sure people picked up on that, right? I
uh,
mean, that's probably what made it connectable, where they, what do you know about, the ivory tower as compared to the, the hog trough? I mean, and he could
yeah,
speak the hog trough and would understand that.
yeah, exactly. Um, I think another thing that impressed people when they saw him up close was his spirituality. In the book, I used the word piety because I just wanted a neutral term, so to speak.
Mm, hmm.
Um, he was someone who got up and prayed for an hour before sunrise every day,
Wow.
wherever he was, in whosever home he was staying, before getting on his horse for an exhausting day of riding somewhere and, meetings and then staying in someone else's house. Um, and people saw him do this, and they knew it wasn't just something he was doing, it was him. It was just who he was. And it gave them a certain respect for him, because they realized that here was someone who was living the life that he urged everyone else to lead. There's this thing about celebrities. I mean, I think with a lot of celebrities, uh, especially today when there's so much exposure, you kind of think, well, they look good on TV or on the sports field or wherever, but probably if you got to know them, you wouldn't like them very much. That wasn't true with Asbury. People loved having him in their homes.
How about that? Well, what was his uh, journey like that he went from this apprenticeship to going into full-time ministry or being or wanting to do that? Did he have a an epiphany moment? Did he have a time that he just really felt drawn to that? Did he hear a sermon? I mean, what really made him move into that direction? And just because you move in that direction and you think you'd like to maybe be a preacher within that Methodist system, as I understand it anyway, just because you might have felt it doesn't mean we think you felt it either. So we got we got to make sure what you felt is what we think is right.
Yes, exactly. And this is how Asbury got most of his preachers as well. So through his mother, he began attending Methodist meetings in this little village outside Birmingham where they lived. And then he joined a class meeting because that's what you did if you wanted to be a Methodist.
Mhm.
And eventually they appointed him a class leader when he was still in his teens.
Okay.
And he must have he must have done what must have demonstrated the kind of integrity and uh, uh, kind of resolve that they were looking for.
Maybe empathy with the
Yeah,
people, right, that he was in the class with, right?
yeah, I think so. And then he had some chances to preach. I can't imagine those went really well based on everything else in his life.
Yeah.
Um, and it's probably why Wesley sent him to all of these little hard scrabble out of the way circuits, because he realized, well, we've got this kid and he seems really sincere and dedicated, but from everything I've heard, he's just not really very good in front of people. So let's send him to these little, kind of hard scrabble circuits and see what he can do. And Asbury was nothing if not tenacious. So he
Mm.
hung on and, as an itinerant preacher, and then finally Wesley in 1771 sent him to the American colonies.
About that. And
Hmm.
so he was glad to go, I guess, right? I mean, if that's where I was sent, did he have any pushback or like, I don't really know if I want to go go over there with these colonies and hang out with these guys, or they're all forget the fact that the revolution hadn't officially started. It was still
Mm-mm.
brewing, right? I mean, so there
Mm.
was still plenty of conversation.
Um, Asbury, he was adventurous.
Mm,
He liked these sort of challenges, and I really think from the correspondence between them, that he loved his mother dearly, but she was overbearing.
mm,
And I think the last thing he wanted to do was end up back in his village, Great Bar outside Birmingham, living in close contact with his parents. So um, he left in 1771 and never saw them again.
I was about to say, did he have siblings?
He had an older sister, 2 years older, who died when she was young.
Okay.
And this actually threw his mother into a deep depression,
Oh, yeah.
which she only came out of when she began attending Methodist meetings.
Okay.
So this was their introduction to Methodism, first through his mom and then Frank. Frank was how he was known in England.
Okay.
But it also made her really clingy, so to speak. She had
Mm.
lost her daughter, and now she didn't want to lose her only uh, other child, her son.
Yeah. And hanging out with his dad may not have been that great either, right? So maybe
No, no.
so maybe there was some pieces of where is he buried?
Well, he was actually buried a couple of times.
Oh, okay.
He died in an out-of-the-way place along the road. He wanted to keep going to demonstrate that he wasn't going to quit. until the very end of his life in 1861, or I mean 1816, I'm sorry. Um, and then when Methodist leadership didn't think that was quite appropriate, that he was just sort of buried in a really out of the way place, they dug him up and buried him in Baltimore.
Ah, okay.
Hmm.
All
Yeah.
right. So he his final earthly spot is on American soil, right? So that would be
Y-
um,
Yeah. He
well,
was
I
an
mean,
American
he was an American.
by
By
the
that time,
end.
he was absolutely an American, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he drunk the Kool-Aid and he was in. Okay, he wasn't like he was looking to go to some other colony or to go to some other spot or be able to. Where was his kind of main footprint, would you say, of the states that he spent most of his time in?
Yeah, I think that's one of his that was one of the secrets to his leader. Well, not secrets, but that was one of the things that made him an effective leader. He didn't really have any place like that. I mean, it would have, I think to a lot of people, it would have made sense just to locate in Baltimore and sort of run the church from a central hub. But
Hmm.
he didn't want to do that because he didn't want to lose that connection. Connection's a really important word for Methodists. So he would normally spend the deep part of the winter in the Carolinas, in South Carolina. It's not
Okay.
stupid. Um,
Okay.
and then at the first of the year, he would start his circuit up, sometimes first up the East Coast to Boston, eventually up through Maine.
Wow.
Then he would turn west and go through, Ohio, which became an important Methodist state, um, down the frontier, wherever that was located. I mean, he started doing this in the 1770s and died in 1816. Kind of make a loop through the Trans-Appalachian frontier, which eventually became well developed,
Hmm.
and then sort of swing back through the South and end up usually in Charleston, although not always, at the end of the year. So it was and again, he varied his route every year. He had a few uh, places he particularly liked to stop, some friends he liked to see as often as he could, but his main goal was to see as much of American Methodism as he could every year.
How about that? Well,
Hmm.
fortunately, right, for any of us and for historical purposes, he's got these great journals, right? I mean,
Hmm.
how,
Yeah.
what a blessing that is to even know, a third of the things that we might even know about him, right? Because at least he wrote those things down.
Yeah, he did. His journals are invaluable. There's also a collection of his letters published in the same set, although they're not complete because since they've been published, a lot of other letters have showed up. I think it's equally telling to see Francis Asbury in other people's journals and letters. So
Ah,
lots of his preachers kept journals, just like their bishop, and of
okay.
course they were constantly writing letters back and forth. So the Francis Asbury that comes through his journal is the same Francis Asbury that other people saw. Um, he didn't really have a private life. There wasn't any way to keep people out of his life because, he rarely had a room to himself.
Yeah,
Think about that. 45 years living as a house guest without a room to yourself because, young itinerant preachers would accompany him to wherever he was speaking, and then they would often go to the home of whoever he was staying with. And people at that time were not only comfortable with sleeping in the same room as each other, but actually sleeping in the same bed.
right.
So often after a full day of doing everything he had to do, he would end up curled up next to one of his preachers in bed. You can't hide very much in those
No,
circumstances.
no. You talk about taking one for the team, right? I mean, that's
Yes.
a big time about. But well, tell us about your book and tell us about what drew you to that. I mean, other than being a historian, I mean, and tell us about that for those of us who would like to learn more about Asbury.
Uh-huh. So I'm not a Methodist, but actually academia, being a historian is a second career for me.
Oh, okay.
Um, when I decided I wanted to go back to grad school and become a history professor,
Mhm.
the thing that interested me most were American religious movements that got big, that grew in a hurry because they did
Mm,
something new in their cultural setting. Um, and initially, I thought I would study early Pentecostals. I'm not a Pentecostal either because of how they grew in the early 20th century.
hmm
But when I got to Notre Dame, which is where I did my graduate work, my advisor, Nathan Hatch, who is just absolutely wonderful,
hmm
said, "Well, I don't do Pentecostalism. I'm an early Americanist." And so I said, "Well, I'm here. What should I do?" And he said, "I think early American Methodism is vastly understudied." And the more I looked at it, it was exactly the kind of thing I was looking for. They started uh, from scratch in the 1770s to become the largest church in the US by the Civil War. So they did
hmm
something extraordinary and something that drew huge numbers of people to them. So my first book, Taking Heaven by Storm, was essentially my dissertation, and it was just my attempt to figure the whole thing out, so to speak. When I was done with that and it was published, I thought, there's a part of this that I really didn't give adequate attention to, and that's Francis Asbury. So I set out to write this biography of Asbury, and that's the book American Saint.
Fantastic. Well, you have uh, enlightened and informed and helped us to understand even more components and pieces of what we do here all the time here at the Center for Christian History, and to think about how someone can be not a generational academic or a pastor or a preacher, and be able to know that they've got tenacity and have some skills that they might not even know that they have, but they
Hmm.
use that for the development of the church, and right place, right time, doing all kind of the right things. So it sounds like we get to take many lessons away from Francis Asbury on that. So
Hmm.
thank you for doing your study and your time and your research, and putting effort into all of that.
Oh, thanks. It's been a fun conversation.
Very good. Well, hey, look, if you're watching this and are enjoying learning more about Christian history, want to learn more about that, please go back to our website at the Center for Christian History.com. Continue to follow us on wherever you get your podcast. Look for other information that we have, including what happened today in Christian history, and a host of other things of great informative information that is out there for you to be able to pick up on. Thank you again.
Thank you.